Why is design important? Why is it important that we've applied the tools and methods of design thinking to this challenge?
Well, one of the biggest benefits of design thinking or human-centered design is that it really starts with putting the end user or the customer or the client, the person who's most affected by this challenge, at the center of everything that we're doing.
And we've run through a process end to end today that began even before we arrived in this room with a design brief, a design challenge, and we spent the morning framing that challenge. And then we moved through a double diamond process. I wonder if you can just explain that double diamond.
Yeah, the double diamond is one of many different ways of visualizing this framework of design thinking or human-centered design. It's not the only way, but it's a helpful one to help us visualize what that looks like. And it's really composed of 4 different parts. And the first part is, as you say, it's understanding all this challenge from the context of the stakeholders who are most involved in it. And really digging into the context of their lives. We talk about empathizing with them. And from that process, we can pull out insights and patterns that we wouldn't really notice. And that understanding those needs and the specific problems that they're facing locally really helps us create innovative solutions. It's really a holistic process that takes into account the entire experience of this for people. And yeah, that is a bottom-up process. It's one which ideally includes the people who are most affected by it.
What kind of things might we do in the context, in the field, in order to gather really important user insights?
Well, as you say, one of the most important things that we can do is actually be there in context, because just by being there, we'll be able to understand things about the local circumstances. But if we were over there, there's a lot of different techniques we do that, and many of them are rooted in the same techniques that anthropologists have been using for 100 years or more. We interview people, we embed ourselves in their communities and get to know them and their daily routines. We observe them, we talk to them and really understand their values and their experiences and the way they go about their days and their habits and their practices.
How do you piece it together? How do we move into the next part of the diamond where we start to converge these insights into useful threads that we can use to develop through this process? There's
a number of different ways we can take that raw, massive amounts of data that we capture in the field by talking to people and synthesize that into insights. The way that we did it today was we used a couple of techniques. One was we called Rose, Thorn, Bud, which is basically taking all this, the observations that we had and codifying that using a 3-part code of things that are positive, things that are negative, and things that strike us as opportunities, not solutions, but opportunities for creating solutions. And then we cluster those into patterns of similarity and affinity, and seeing it from that big picture, and starting to be able to become aware of the patterns that reveal themselves. That process of synthesis allows us to generate insights around the needs and the desires of local people that is very difficult to do when we're looking at it from a different perspective. And so that's the affinity clustering was what revealed those insights, and those insights we begin refining those into what we call points of view. And we begin to orient ourselves toward how we might set ourselves up for coming up with lots of solutions for those challenges.
How did we refine those challenge questions into something that we could use into the ideation phase?
Well, when we're moving from that first diamond, as you say, into the second diamond, we're really moving from the problem framing stage of this process into the problem solving stage of that process. And when we do that, we really want to set ourselves up in the most effective, most productive way of orienting ourselves toward broad, collaborative exploration of many possible ideas, because that's a big part of this, is not just coming up with one idea we think is going to work, but setting ourselves up with as many possible ideas as we can that we can begin to iterate through rapidly. And so the way that we did that was we took those points of view and began to think about them in terms of what we called how might we questions. We can call those statement starters, we can call them challenge statements. It doesn't matter really what we call them, but the key is that we're phrasing them in a really specific way that not only encapsulates the insight that we've discovered in the process of our research, but it sets us up toward thinking about solutions and many possible solutions in a collaborative way. So the words "how might we" is a great way to set up any of those challenge statements because it achieves all those things.
So before lunch, our teams created a whole lot of how might we questions from their various points of view, and then they went through a consensus process to refine that down to 4 questions, which then fed into the second half of the day, into the second diamond, the iteration phase. We used a tool called Creative Matrix. Tell us why Creative Matrix is a useful tool for ideation.
It's a great tool because Creative Matrix leverages several different kinds of constraints to allow us to be more creative and to generate more ideas. And what we do find is anyone, for example, who's ever worked up against a deadline know that certain kinds of constraints can be very useful to generating ideas. And Creative Matrix is one of those ways that takes the constraints of time, takes the constraints of coming up with ideas specifically in one little grid, this challenge according to this kind of solution, and what are all the ways that we can think of addressing this particular challenge using technology or using differences in environment. And again, it's also something where we're writing the ideas down on a very small Post-it note. We don't have a lot of space to do that, which is what we're after. At that point, more quantity than quality, because later on there'll be lots of time to think about quality.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really interesting part of the day where teams actually stood back in front of their Creative Matrix and had a discussion about things that they wanted to share and things that they wanted to learn more about. Why is that part of the tool so important?
Well, as you saw, that process generates a lot of ideas in a very short time. In the process of literally 12 or 13 minutes, this group of 20 people generated 186 ideas. That's a lot of ideas to have to be convergent about, to start talking about. So one of the ways that I find that you can get that discussion started is to just use that sort of a visual voting technique of asking people to choose a couple of ideas of their own that they want to talk about, a couple of ideas from somebody else that they'd like to hear more about. That doesn't mean that the other ideas are not worth discussing. They very much are discussing, but it's a great place just to begin that discussion.
Later in the afternoon, we moved into the convergent process of prototyping and iteration, and we broke up into small groups, and we asked people to create a storyboard with 2 different ideas that they've selected from the matrix. So what's a prototype and why is it important?
Well, a prototype is any way of modeling an idea in the physical world. Ideas are great, but too often they spend too much time inside our heads where they're not doing anybody any good inside our heads. An idea is best taken out of our heads as quickly as we can and put into the real world, because that's the only way we can make it better. We're activating the intelligence of other people and getting other people to not only give us ideas on that, but feedback on it and getting people to interact with it. Ideally, a prototype is something that we're putting in front of the kinds of people who are going to be using that solution.
And so we actually got feedback from other users by doing mini pitches between smaller teams, and the teams actually were able to add buds to their ideas and actually further develop new opportunities even in the process of prototyping.
Yeah. One of the best things that we can do is bring a little bit of structure to that process, and that's what we did. We made it very simple. We just asked people to not say anything good about it, not say anything bad about it, but we focused only on this one aspect: how would you make this thing better? And we made that very quick. It was a 2 or 3 minute process.
And we said to teams that they couldn't defend their ideas. Why was that? Why would we do that?
That's really great, because when we make that a common rule for everybody, then you free everyone up from feeling the need to respond to something.
So the ultimate goal of the day is to come up with a prototype that is both viable, desirable, and feasible. And so we had a number of pitches to our panel and to the rest of the team in the afternoon. That was really the culmination of that process, to be able to describe what the teams have come up with during the process of the whole day. And we actually used a specific model of feedback. I like, I wish, what if. Why do we choose that framework to provide feedback on the prototypes?
Again, it's a great way of bringing structure to that feedback process. So that's simply this I like, I wish, what if is a way of structuring that feedback that squeezes all the possible goodness that we can out of the group who is watching in a way that turns that into a way to make these ideas better.
So we went through an end-to-end process through 2 diamonds today, from framing all the way through to prototyping and iteration, and we've now got the seeds of ideas that could be potentially developed into something that's desirable, viable and feasible. What would be the next steps if we were taking these forward?
The next steps would be to continue to think about rapid iteration, how we can make these things more real in the real world and more feasible and viable by validating them with actual users. The great thing about this process of human-centered design is that, again, everything is all about the people, the humans that are at the center of it. And what that means is that any idea that we have is based on dozens, scores of assumptions, and all of those assumptions must be true for that thing to work the way we originally imagined it. But what this asks us to do is to question those assumptions, to test those assumptions, very much in the way that a scientist would test a hypothesis.
Did you have fun today?
I had a great time. I'm wiped out.
I think it's time.
And I'll tell you, the ideas that we saw were spectacular.
All right, so our initial idea came from the post-it note of the self-cleaning toilet. And so the actual door would have a double side where on the outside you can see that the toilet is occupied. Another feature is on the ground there will be a silhouette of some feet, so you know where you need to stand and where you need to squat. And also some sort of hand railing, so something to lean on so that you're sort of in position. And what that solves is that you've got better chance of getting the hole in one.
We've got a hygiene station that uses solar UV light as a sterilization technique instead of water. So we've got a respected female community member, potentially a community health worker, we're not sure yet. We'll introduce this idea to the women of the community before it happens. Then it will be installed and there'll be a demonstration of how to use it, as well as provision of information about hygiene practices. You can have a separate one for women and for men, but it would be centrally located in the village.
Now, what if we could put a price on poo to reduce the incidence of trachoma? The poo can be treated with ash to reduce its offensiveness, and then we have a poo delivery collecting guy who comes and collects the poo in the box. And Bob receives money for his efforts. The poo then goes to a central factory where the critical mass of poo is then used to generate electricity, which can be used to power his home or industry.
So we decided to try and innovate a new hand wash using local materials, but also methods that are already used locally. And so yams are quite plentiful in Ethiopia, and communities already harvest and use yams to make alcohol. And I'm not 100% sure what the process is, but I think you harvest the yams, you soften them in some way. I think they're buried underground, then blended into a paste, and you can filter the paste to produce the alcohol at the bottom. So we thought, what if we could use all the fibrous bit at the top, which would have alcohol in it, to make it into a hand sanitizer.
Then Abajabil and his kids, after they go to the toilet in the field, will spray, or it could be a powder or something they put on the poo that will stop the smell, like you guys were thinking with the ash, but will also repel flies, and also makes it a bit more solid and easier to pick up in the bag. So then they're encouraged to pick it up in the bag, take it back to the compost bin outside the house and put it in the compost bin.
Okay, so not knowing about the yam, but still wanting to solve the problem of like how do we create hygiene, clean fingers and faces without water, we're like, well, why don't we go into the community in that part of Ethiopia and identify a local antibacterial plant. I'm sure there are others besides the yam. And then once we've done that, we'll basically educate the community on the use of this plant and how they can prepare it at home.